Are you tired of sifting through endless resumes looking for the perfect candidate to fill a leadership opening? Skift Executive Search can help. We have an insider view of the travel industry and can leverage both our expertise and connections to find your next rockstar hire. To learn more, visit skift.com/exec-search or email us at execsearch@skift.com.
Welcome back to the Skift Travel Podcast. I am Skift's editor-in-chief, Sarah Kopit, and I am solo today. Seth is across the pond at WTM in London. But it's his loss because today we are talking about space tourism. And Jane Poynter, founder of Space Perspective, is here to say hello and tell us all about it. Hi, Jane. How you doing?
Hi there. Awesome. I am sadly, Sarah, at ground level, and I am not in space. Not quite yet, but it's coming soon.
Yeah, so we're gonna get right to that. But before we do, I want to just give a quick reminder to those listening out there to send us any questions or comments that you might have to podcasts@skift.com. And please don't forget to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening or watching. And if you're enjoying the show, please rate us 5 stars or leave us a positive review so we can spread the word about the Skift Travel Podcast. All right, Jane. I am quite wowed by Space Perspective, and I don't know if most of our listeners are even aware of what your company is doing. So this is a podcast. Most people aren't going to get to see this, but it'll blow your mind. Tell us about what y'all are up to, Jane.
Okay. Imagine you get up early in the morning and you step into an incredibly comfortably appointed capsule that is large and roomy. You're handed your beverage of choice because we have a bar on board. We have fully streaming Wi-Fi and, of course, a loo. We then very gently and silently and slowly launch to space. And the reason that we're able to do it gently, slowly, and silently is because we don't use rockets.
Right.
We use a balloon that takes us up. It takes us about 2 hours to get to space. Then we're up there for a couple of hours, see the majesty of our Earth from that point of view, and then a couple of hours to come back down. So ultimately what we're really doing, Sarah, is making space accessible in ways that people just can't even imagine at this point.
Yeah, because now we've only got the suborbital rockets.
Right, which are great. They're awesome, right? But this is really different. I mean, I don't know about you, but I kind of love the idea that I'm going to space in a super comfy space lounge.
Yeah.
You know, I get to have my meal. I get to have my drink. I get to have my friends, my loved ones. You know, it's a very different idea and experience of going to space, to the edge of space.
Okay, so let's back up a little bit because I have a feeling that if I'm a listener out there, my first thought is, what? We're going to space in a balloon?
Yes.
Like, back up. When did this start? Like, what was the engineering process? Who got this idea? Talk me through kind of the logistics and the science of how a balloon gets to the point where you can see like the blackness of space and the curvature of the Earth, because that's a long way off from like your run-of-the-mill hot air balloon ride, right? So take us back even farther to the beginning.
Well, so maybe what I should start with is saying, like, how is this even possible?
Right.
So what you can do is imagining that the balloon, which, by the way, is the size of a football stadium. We're not talking like some little tiny thing. This is 350 feet in diameter once it's at the edge of space. So once it's up there, it is floating on top of Earth's atmosphere, rather like an ice cube floats on top of your glass of water. So once you're above the atmosphere, which for us is 20 miles up, roughly 30 kilometers, you now have that extraordinary view of our sun as a star in a black sky with that thin blue line of our atmosphere just absolutely bright against that black sky. The magic is we're getting above the atmosphere. And so you can have this experience that astronauts, I mean, anybody you've ever spoken to who's gone to space, every single one of them will tell you in some way or another that this experience of seeing our planet from that vantage point has changed them. It has changed their worldview. It's changed their lives. It's just blown them away. And in many ways, unexpectedly, even for people who knew that it could happen, were unexpected by how moving an experience it is to see our planet from up there.
And so what is the balloon filled with? I suspect it's not air.
It is not, because it has to be lighter than air.
Yeah.
So we use hydrogen. It's an awesome lift gas. Another gas that we can also use is helium, but that isn't really obtainable. And hydrogen is much, much better lift gas. And now that we've got this wonderful hydrogen economy, we're also able to do it in a way that's carbon neutral.
When did Space Perspective start testing this product? When did the first plans get drawn up? Whose idea was it?
So Taylor MacCallum and myself are the two co-founders. Our entire careers have been in human spaceflight. And basically our entire adult lives have been focused on, one way or another, how do we get people to space safely and with an incredibly accessible experience. And it sort of started with a project way back in the day that some of your listeners may remember, which was a project called Biosphere 2, where 8 of us were sealed inside the world's first fully sustainable prototype space base.
I do remember that.
That was us. So Tabor and I were on the design team, and then we lived inside it for 2 years and 20 minutes. Whole long story about why it was an extra 20 minutes. And that experience, in a very interesting way, is quite akin to the experience of seeing our Earth from the outside.
Right.
You know, we were sort of embedded in our biosphere, right? So imagine the biosphere was a completely sealed, at the time, sealed tighter than the International Space Station. So it was a completely sealed container with plants and animals and a farm system and a rainforest, a savanna, an ocean, a marsh, and us, 8 of us, living inside. And we completely recycled everything. And I knew moment to moment where all of that was coming from, and I could see the edges of my world, and I knew that all we had in there was us and what everything was in there, which by analogy is the same thing that actually astronauts experience. So really that set us off on this journey of taking us all to space. And ever since then, I've been working on it in one way or another. And it just didn't seem that rockets were the way that we were all going to go.
Yeah.
And at least not initially in this market. Eventually, yes. But initially, no. We need to create the market, get people used to the idea of going to space. And Tabor saw these balloons that we're using as a child. His father is an astrophysicist and used these balloons to take enormous telescopes to space to study. Actually, it was the middle of our Milky Way galaxy, and he was the one on the team that discovered our black hole at the middle of our Milky Way galaxy using one of these balloons.
Yeah.
So one day he walks into my office and goes, "What do you think about taking people to space under a balloon?" I'm like, "That's it. That's exactly what we're going to do." And here we are.
And how long ago was that?
So that was a while ago, actually. It's been a journey, because the first thing we did was actually, we were approached by the then Google executive, Alan Eustace.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to break the Rebel Stratos jump. You may remember Felix Baumgartner standing on the threshold of a capsule, that extraordinary iconic view, and then he throwing himself out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And space dive back to Earth.
Yeah.
And then 2 years later, very quietly, we broke his record. And it uses the same kind of balloons. And Alan reported an extraordinary experience of going up slowly to space and then having this experience of seeing Earth in space. And we were like, okay, well, I think that's kind of clinched it. This is how we're going to do it. And that was in 2014. And so here we are now with a fully operational capsule. We did a test flight in 21 that was a simulator. It really was demonstrating for ourselves the whole flight profile and all of that. And then just 6 weeks ago, we did the first flight of our fully operational Spaceship Neptune, the whole thing. As we could have been on board it. It went so well, we could have been on board. And we weren't, sadly. And so that was about 6 weeks ago. We've got about another 8-9 flights to do without people, which is great. We can fly without people. So that means we can test all the backup systems, of which there are many. And then Tabor, myself, and Sir Richard Branson are going to go on the first crewed flight.
And so when are you expecting that? When's the first crewed flight, do you think?
So our target, end of next year. Please do not put it on your calendar.
Okay.
We have safety gates, right? We have internally imposed safety gates that we need to get through.
Yeah.
But that's our target.
So let's talk about safety.
Yeah.
I mean, what happens if the balloon falls out of the sky? It has a hole in it. Like, tell me all about that. Is it dangerous?
So it is really safe. And the balloon itself, so let's kind of break it down into its different parts, right? So the balloon is the kind of balloon that has been flown over 1,000 times by NASA and the European Space Agency and members of our team. So it's a very well understood legacy technology. And in the last 20 years, there hasn't been a single in-flight failure of one of these balloons. So it's really well understood. So you start out with a really solid primary flight system.
I think maybe listeners probably don't even realize that the concept of space balloons, the technology of that is not something that is, that is fresh to us. It's something that the space agencies have been using for a while.
That's exactly right. And it's mostly because they've been used for research.
Right.
So they've been used a lot, and even larger balloons than the ones that we're flying. We intentionally are not flying the largest balloon ever flown. We're using like right in the middle of its operating envelope, if you will, so that it's also really safe, because then it's very well understood and very tested. We're not pushing the envelope of the technology. So that's really good. So yeah, it's been used for decades and decades. So that's a great thing. Okay, so you still have to have backup systems. So what is ours? So we have a parachute system that is connected to the capsule. There's 4 parachute systems that can take over at any time during the flight. Only 2 of them have to work, so we even have redundancy within the redundancy. That kind of thinking has gone through every part of this design. I mean, for example, we have 5 different ways of communicating with the capsule. Plus, we have a captain on board who I suppose could take over at any time. I mean, it's flown from mission control and it flies itself, but the captain could certainly take over at any time, right? So you have all these very different ways of accomplishing the same thing, which then also results in a super safe system. And then on top of that, we work very closely. We are regulated by the Coast Guard and the FAA.
Yeah, that was my next question. What are the regulations for this? It's not something that I can just recall off the top of my head. What type of, government regulation oversees a space balloon? Is it the FAA?
Well, so we are with the Coast Guard as well as the FAA, and I'll get into the Coast Guard in a minute because that has a whole explanation involved in the Coast Guard. What have they got to do with space? But the FAA is who actually regulates the flight, and it's the FAA's Office of Commercial Space Transportation. So that's the same organization that regulates SpaceX or Virgin Galactic or Blue Origin or anybody like that. So we fall under that same regulatory environment. Now, for now, launch from a ship and we splash in the ocean. And I can get into why that's a great thing in a minute. But that then means we are then also regulated by the Coast Guard, which is great. So we got 2 regulatory bodies that we work with.
Tell me why. Tell me why you want to take off and splash down from the ocean.
Yeah. So for us, this is all about customer experience.
Yeah.
And so when we take off from the ocean from a ship, we can move to areas of good weather so we can operate all year long. So we're not constrained by weather in the way that one normally would be if you are tied to a single launch location. Now then we can also, actually the ship moves with the wind and with the direction of the wind. So as we're standing up the balloon and launching it, we have perfect launch conditions over the ship at all times. So then that means it's just this very reliable operating envelope. Then as a business, we now have something that is really easy to duplicate around the world. So, we're starting operations in Florida, around here in the Gulf of Mexico, in the Atlantic, in the Caribbean. And then we're going to do this all over the world. So now imagine we're in the Mediterranean and we're looking at the Boot of Italy, or we're looking at the pyramids from space. You just let your mind wander about all the different amazing places you would like to actually see from space. We can now take this ship and take you anywhere.
So amazing. We are going to take a break here and come back on the other side with more about space travel, space tourism, and all things space balloons.
The countdown is on for our third annual Skift Global Forum East. Join us this November 19th and 20th in Dubai as we bring together 500 of the region's most powerful travel and tourism decision makers. With executives from companies like Emirates, Accor, Dubai Tourism, and Jumeirah in attendance, this is an event you can't afford to miss. Secure your tickets now at live.skift.com and get ready to connect and learn from the best at Skift Global Forum East.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Skift Travel Podcast. We are talking about space tourism today. Jane, tell me a little bit about why space tourism is going to go mainstream with your space balloon. It has a little something to do with a lot lower price tag.
So when we started Space Perspective, for us, we wanted to eliminate all the barriers for people. Part of that is price, for sure, right? So our current ticket price is $125,000 a ticket, as opposed to 700 or, a million or two, or 55 million if you want to go to the International Space Station. So ticket price already much lower. Obviously, in the long term, we're looking to bring ticket prices down further by having a larger capsule, more people on board, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's also about making the experience something that people can imagine themselves doing. Even if they want to go to space, most people can't quite imagine themselves jammed into a spacesuit, having trained for days, weeks, or months in a small capsule on a rocket. A few people can, most people can't. And so what we've done is eliminated all that and said, you don't have to deal with any of that. You basically can show up and get on Spaceship Neptune, and we're designing it and the whole experience to be as easy as flying on an airplane. So now you've completely changed the experience and the idea for people, and you've made it more affordable.
Yeah, and it strikes me as being a lot more like pure play tourism, where I don't know, if your suborbital rockets are maybe like climbing Everest. I mean, it's not like my cup of tea, right? Like, it's cold and hard and
yeah, it's soft. It's a much softer experience. That's exactly right. This is a soft experience, and that's exactly what we are aiming for here, is to make it a soft experience. So what was exciting for me about this last test flight that we just did, obviously it was awesome that the spacecraft itself worked so well, and we demonstrated launching from a ship and splashing and the whole bit. What was also great was we really validated that this is going to be a very gentle flight, and it's going to be very smooth all the way through. And that's a critical piece to this, because then anybody can go.
Yeah. So as somebody who has worked in this field for your entire career, I'm curious to get your thoughts as to, why we're talking so much about space tourism now, or even like the space economy. I was, on the front page of the New York Times last week, and there were like 3 separate articles that all had to do with the business of space. A lot of that has to do with SpaceX, I suppose. And it's just all of a sudden, it seems like it's everywhere in the zeitgeist. Well, what's going on? Like, why is this all happening now? Like, what is this precipice that we're on? Like, I feel like we're getting close to something that's going to change everything.
Yeah, so there's a number of things going on at once. When Tabor and I founded our first company, after we got out of Biosphere 2, Paragon Space Development Corporation with Grant Anderson, we were 30. Now, in the space industry, that seems completely normal. And in fact, if you haven't started your space company by the time you were 30, you're like, what are you waiting for? Whereas then it was like, what? What are you doing? You're insane. Because it was the realm of governments. And now we've seen a lot of investment coming into the space industry. You've seen the things that we have been talking about for 30 years that seemed science fiction 30 years ago are now happening.
Yeah.
We've got rockets landing back on the ground with greatly reduced costs of going to space. And we've got tugs pulling satellites around in space. We've got refueling going on in space. We've got, huge constellations of satellites going on in space, allowing people to be remotely connected in places that we simply couldn't have dreamt of before. And so what you've seen is this burgeoning of a whole ecosystem in this industry. And most of us rely on space all day without even knowing that we're relying on space. So then now you think about space travel. I think of it as space travel more than space tourism, because tourism is a part of it. Right. Space travel, obviously, a lot of that is technology. Technology has come a long way, but it's also that the world is ready for it now.
Yeah.
If you think back when the very first tourist went, Dennis Tito, that was in 2001. And he had to fight to get on ISS, just simply because the idea of somebody being a tourist in space was anathema to the whole idea, sort of the right stuff of NASA, of, only governments can do space. And of course, now, 23 was a seminal year, maybe even as early as 22. 22 was a seminal year for space travel, because you saw Virgin Galactic, Blue Origin, Axiom, all taking private citizens to space.
Yeah. All
at the same time, in the same year. And it was a seminal year for our industry. And now, we've gone from a single individual going to space to actually we had an almost $1 billion year. And it's just going to take off from here with this industry. The projections are it's going to be about 10 billion by the end of this decade. So you're really beginning to see the flywheel effect of the entire industry really take off in every way. And it's incredibly exciting.
With the, your company and technology aside, what other projects and developers, companies really get you excited in the industry right now? Who else is doing cool stuff?
Oh, wow. I mean, there's oh God, I don't even know where to start. So if we're really talking about human spaceflight, what's amazing to me, I was just at an event this last weekend, and there were 4 different companies up there talking about their space station. Right. Yeah. We're laughing, but the fact is they must all think there's a market there, and they're all getting money to build these space stations orbiting planet Earth. That is incredibly exciting. We've talked about it for so long. We've seen science fiction for so long, and now science fiction is becoming science fact and a real business. That's the other thing that gets me really excited. There's been a lot of passionate people in space for decades. Now that passion is turning into real business, and that is good for everyone.
Do you think that we'll put a permanent structure on the moon? Do you think we'll start, using that to mining of asteroids and all of that, in the near term? That's one of the next things that I've heard a lot of people talking about as being from a truly business perspective.
So I don't know enough about, technically, yes.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about the details of the business plan to know how to make a real business out of something as future forward as that. What I will say, our focus at Space Perspective, it's kind of twofold. On the one hand, we see ourselves as a feeder to the industry. We're sort of creating space travelers.
Yeah.
But what we're also doing is by giving people, and a lot of people, this experience of seeing Earth from space, we're also creating this highly bonded group of individuals who have had an profound experience. And some of them are going to come back and do something magnificent that newfound perspective that they gained from going to space.
What do you think the role of humans will be in space over the next few decades? So now we're going to look out, now we're going to go out, to 2050, right? What do you think is going to happen? As you said, and rightfully so, I remember reading 2001 when I was a younger adult, and a lot of it had already come true. What do you think the next step is as a species, human beings, in the journey into space?
Yeah. So I'm going to break it up into kind of different layers. So of course, it's all about us, right? So, but joking apart, if we, where will we be? So we envision in not very long where we're going to be carrying thousands of people to space a year. And people are going to be sitting around their dining room table going, okay, kids, we went on a great safari last year, and we've been to the Antarctic. Paris is awesome, but why don't we go to space? It's going to be something that is just part of what we do.
It's an option.
It's an option. That's exactly right. It's an option. And then we're also going to see, what we're already doing is think of our capsule as almost a content studio, an event space in space, right? We've already got somebody who's taking their piano up on our capsule to do a sound bath from space. Obviously we're talking to musicians and weddings. I mean, just let your mind run wild, and then we'll have people staying overnight and all the rest of it. So the idea of being able to go on a day trip to space, go for a week in space is going to be very commonplace. And then we go a little further out, and now what we're seeing is we're starting to build infrastructure off of this planet elsewhere.
Yeah.
And that hopefully will allow us to offshore some of what we do right here on planet Earth that we would love to have done somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah, that helps with a multitude of problems, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Well, Jane, thank you so much for being with us today. I think we will leave it there. These are just delicious things to think about. I cannot wait to watch the progress of the Space Perspective balloon and the capsule and your test flights and your launches. And well done.
Thank you, Sarah. Come and see us. We would love to have you come and see our beautiful spaceship Neptune, look through the world's largest windows and the world's largest capsule.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. Well, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. And to all of our listeners out there, don't forget to check us out, like us, subscribe, listen, give us 5 stars in whatever platform you are listening, and we will see you next week. Thank you for listening to the Skiff Travel Podcast. Wherever you're listening, please make sure to subscribe. If you like what you're hearing, rate us 5 stars or leave us a positive review. It really helps get the word out about us, our podcast, and make sure that we can still continue to bring it to you free of charge every week.
If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell as well. That way you'll know every time we have a new episode.